This is the third video in our series under Chapter 12, Part B. The learning objectives on this video are to understand joint products that arise from a single common input, the definition of the split-off point, and what are joint costs. Also, to analyze the decision to further process a product or not. Now, joint products are this. Some companies manufacture a number of products from a single raw material input. Such products are known as joint products. So we can see this in lumber, in oil, meat products, lots of different kinds of products. The split-off point is the point in the manufacturing process at which the joint products can be recognized as separate products, and they can be sold at that particular point. Now, often though, these products can be sold at the initial setup point or further processed and sold at a higher price. So for example, lumber. Once it's cut down and bent to the lumber mill, it can be sold as untreated wood, or it can be further processed by staining, treating it, sanding it, these kinds of things, and sold at a higher price. Another example is animals such as cows. They can be sold as a whole once they've been dispatched, or they can be butchered into separate individual cuts of meat. Our example that we're going to be working with is, before we get off that too far, when we're talking about the further process decision, we're going to be looking at incremental revenues, that would be the increase in sales value from processing, and comparing it to the incremental costs. We'll come back to this multiple times. Okay, so the example that we're going to be working with is Hillhoff Farm Dairy. Hillhoff is a small Midwest Michigan farm dairy that processes and bottles certified organic milk in glass bottles. The milk is pasteurized but not homogenized, so the glass bottles are returned, cleaned, and reused. Hillhoff sells their product in 48 relatively small retail outlets, such as Kingman's Market. Although Hillhoff produces over 20 different end products, in this example we're going to assume that they produce skim milk and cream, or they can process the skim milk into yogurt, and they can process the cream into butter and buttermilk. Each product uses one bottle with the exception of butter, which is wrapped in paper. The costs of the bottles and the paper are included in the processing costs. So let's take a look at a picture or a model of what Hillhoff products might look like. The product starts with raw milk. There are some costs to get that raw milk and to process it. And after it is processed, skim milk comes out of the processor and cream. This would be our split-off point. They're not selling the raw milk, they're selling the skim milk or the cream. Now the skim milk, we're going to assume, can be fermented into yogurt. And the cream can be further separated into butter and buttermilk. Now each of these additional processing has costs associated with it, and so we call these the incremental processing costs. So let's look at some data, and I did take this from their websites, fairly close. They sell skim milk for $6 per half gallon, cream $8 a quart, yogurt $5 a quart, butter $10 a pound, and buttermilk $4 a quart. Now, I made the costs up just to help us. So to produce the raw milk, we're assuming it costs $1.20 per gallon of raw milk. And then to skim that cream, these are part of the joint product cost. Before we get our separated product, we have an additional 80 cents per gallon. So the joint product costs are both the $1.20 and the 80 cents. Now to make yogurt, it's an additional 50 cents per quart. And to make butter and buttermilk, it's an additional $5 per quart of cream. Now, what are the yields? From 1 gallon of raw milk, 3/4 of a gallon of skim milk are separated out from 1 quart of cream. Now, from that skim milk, 1 gallon of skim milk yields 4 quarts of yogurt. So we see a 1-to-1 relationship here. The yield from 1 quart of cream is 1 pound of butter and 1/4 quart or a pint of buttermilk. So this is going to help us. We're going to come back to this information. As we get started, recall that I said that we have to compute the incremental revenues and the incremental costs. Let's look at our revenues. The prices were given to us in all sorts of different denominators. We had half gallons, quarts, pints, these kinds of things. So let's convert all of our sales revenue into the revenue from 1 gallon of raw milk. So 1 gallon of raw milk yields 1/4 gallon of skim milk and 1/4 gallon of cream, or 3/4 gallons of skim milk and 3 quarts and 1 quart of cream. So the skim milk sells for $6 for half a gallon. So per 1 gallon of raw milk, I have 2 half gallons, but I only get 3/4 of that. So I take 3/4 times 6 times 2, and I get $9 per gallon of raw milk. You can look at it another way. If I take a gallon of raw milk and I skim it, I get 3/4 of a gallon of skim milk, or $9 worth of skim milk. Now, that skim milk has a 1-to-1 relationship with yogurt. So when we process the skim milk into yogurt, we get the same amount here. Okay. So from 1 gallon of raw milk, Hillhoff could produce 3/4 of a gallon of yogurt, or 3 quarts of yogurt. Each quart of yogurt sells for $5. So from 1 gallon of raw milk, Hillhoff could generate $15 of profit. Now the cream, on the other hand, sells for $8 a quart. 1 quart is produced from 1 gallon of raw milk. So $8, it's $8 per gallon of raw milk. When the cream is spun down into butter, we get 1 pound of butter, which sells for $10, and half a quart of buttermilk, which at $4 per quart is $2 for this gallon of raw milk. So everything now has been converted into the same denominator. It's per gallon of raw milk. And we're going to use that as our analysis denominator. What about the incremental cost information, or the cost to further process? We skip the joint costs because those aren't going to change as we think about whether or not we want to produce yogurt from the skim milk and butter from the cream. So the additional processing costs for the yogurt are 50 cents per quart, or $1.50 for the 3 quarts from 1 gallon of raw milk. The additional costs to produce the butter is $5 per quart. In other words, $5 per gallon. So once we have this information, we can now put it into our model for the analysis of whether to sell or further process a product. So we're going to look at the 2 products separately. The skim milk to yogurt is a separate decision from the cream to the butter. So our first job is to identify the incremental revenue. We're going to take the sales value after processing and subtract off the sales value at the split off point. And what we see is that by producing yogurt from the skimmed milk, there's an additional revenue of $9 per gallon of raw milk. The yogurt can sell for a total of $15, the skim milk for $9, and that incremental is $6 per gallon. The cream to butter, the after processing value was $12. We computed that on the previous slide. The cream could sell for $8, so we have an incremental revenue of $4. Now we compare that to the incremental cost, which we had computed to be $1.50 for producing yogurt and $5 for the butter. So our profits from further processing are $4.50 for the yogurt and a loss of $1 for the cream and the butter. So this brings up our quiz. Should Hillhoff further process skim milk into yogurt? And keep in mind this is a separate decision from should Hillhoff further process cream into butter and buttermilk. Yes, Hillhoff should further process the skim milk into yogurt. We saw an additional profit per gallon of raw milk of $4.50. No, Hillhoff should not further process cream into butter and buttermilk. The cost of processing this is more than the additional revenues. So they should sell the cream at the $8 per quart. I have a second quiz here. Relevant to the decision to process the skim milk into yogurt and sell it as yogurt. So we've already computed the fact that it was useful to do this. Now let's take the next step and think about what kinds of additional considerations. So which ones are appropriate? Check all that apply. And which one is most important? Okay, let's go over this. The capacity to make yogurt, is that an important consideration? Well, we were assuming that they had the capacity to turn all of that skim milk into yogurt. But maybe they don't, and that would be a relevant consideration. What about the capacity of distribution channels? In other words, the shelf space available for yogurt. Can Hillhoff get the shelf space for that much yogurt in the refrigerators that they sell their product in? This again is a relevant consideration. It's not in the case, and we have assumed that there was no constraint here. Another issue could be the availability of bottles for the product. But let's think about this. A quart of skim milk goes to a quart of cream, or a half gallon of skim milk and a quart of yogurt. I'm going to need half-gallon jugs, and I'm going to need half-gallon bottles, and I'm going to need quart bottles. Is there availability of both of those products? That's an important consideration. D, the amount of raw milk available. Well, this has a limited impact because we're thinking not of the raw milk available, but rather the skim milk to yogurt transformation. So this is a trivial consideration, except when paired with the next one, which is demand for the product. So it's important here to recognize that this example did not talk at all about whether or not they could sell all that yogurt. And this is the most important consideration. If a business is going to further process something, it may be in their cost advantage, but the question is, can they sell it? So all of these considerations link with our previous work that we did in capacity constraints, or utilization of scarce resources. And so we can see that it all flows together into one particular decision.